Welcome to our class, DJS 2106, Conflict Resolution and Peace Science. And our today's lesson focuses on conflict analysis. So we just want to understand how you can analyze a conflict as an expert, so that then you can be able to intervene and help end that conflict, but also find lasting solutions to that conflict. We shall divide the lesson into 6 parts, so that we can look first at conflict as a wicked problem. Then we can look at the nested nature of land disputes, the case of Kenya. And then we can look at the principles of conflict analysis, approaches to conflict analysis, worldviews upon which conflict analysis tools are based, and then lastly, we can look at the conflict analysis tools themselves, so that then we can get a thorough understanding of what actually goes into analyzing a conflict, and then what tools then can we use to intervene in a conflict. So first, we begin by looking at conflict as a wicked problem, and we are using the term wicked as opposed to term problems, so that conflict is a social problem, and therefore it has got different dimensions. It is different from, say, a scientific or a technical problem or a mathematical problem. So an example would be, if you want to find the circumference of a circle, then the formula will be pi d, regardless of whether you are calculating that sum from Kenya or from China or from Pakistan. It doesn't matter, but because that is a mathematical problem. But conflict is wicked in such a way that you can have a tribal conflict here in Kenya and another tribal conflict in a country like Rwanda. So the methods you use to respond to that conflict will not be the same, even if in both cases it is a tribal conflict. That's why we are calling conflict a wicked problem. So briefly, we look at the features of conflict as a wicked problem. And one of them is that conflicts are illy defined and they resist a clear definition, meaning you are not able to come up with one definition of what a conflict is. You can take an example of what happened in Kenya in 07-08. If you asked people what was the problem, you will see that almost everybody will try to give you their own different definition of what they think the problem is. As such, when defining a problem becomes a problem or a challenge, then even finding solutions to it will also become a challenge. That is why when we are resolving conflicts, you do not just come up with one solution and you put it there and the conflict ends. And the feature number 2 is that solutions to conflict cannot be labeled as good or bad, as opposed to a technical problem. Say, if your printer was not working and it was because it was not connected to power, when you connect it to power, it works, and that solution is good. It's actually the only solution, so it's the best. But when you come to a country like Kenya and the 42 tribes are fighting among each other, and you think that the only solution is to arrest the people who are fighting as criminals and putting them in prison, it depends now. That solution cannot be good as bad. It depends with who you are talking to. So the solutions become relative, and then one solution cannot solve the whole problem the way it would do in a technical problem. And that every conflict is unique and novel. So you cannot come up with one solution fits all. As such, it means that every conflict has to be analyzed individually. It might have some similarities with another conflict, but then you have to find the unique aspects of that conflict for you to be able to solve it. And then that conflicts contain an interconnected web of sub problems. such that there is always the major conflict, and then within that conflict, you find other small problems that are fueling that conflict. So when you're trying to solve that conflict, you should try to look at those small problems so that you can solve it entirely. So you don't just focus on one thing. And that the only way to address a conflict, as opposed to technical problems, is to try solutions, so that you are using a multiple solutions. After you analyze the conflict and you understand it properly, you try to use a series of solutions that are likely to minimize the drivers of the conflict and actually lead to long-term peace. And so that gives us an example of land disputes in a country like Kenya. Some two scholars in Kenya came up with this diagram in around 2005, 2006. And it just goes to let you know how conflict is actually a wicked problem. So it tells you the periodic political stresses that we have in Kenya during the times of campaigns and elections. And people are likely to think that that is what causes land disputes in Kenya. But then when you look underneath, you find there so many other problems that actually lead to conflict that we actually do not see. So we are likely going to think that politics is the cause of conflict in Kenya. But when you look at it, you see that land conflicts have got so many underlying causes. For instance, some areas in Kenya are protected by the government, but the government started protecting them when they were already being occupied by certain communities, and certain communities claim that they own those areas. So as such, it leads to conflict, inter-ethnic tensions, historical land claims, communities claiming that, for instance, before Kenya was colonized, they were occupying certain parts of the country, and after independence, the founding president came up with the principle of willing buyer, willing seller. So the government took the land and sold it out instead of giving it back to the rightful community, so that those claims are likely to lead to conflict. And there are so many other causes underneath here, including falling land registry, where people are not able to they buy land, but they are not able to get land title deeds in good time. And some lands are being occupied by entire families and entire clans and entire communities, as opposed to this land being divided so that each person can have their own land title deed. So the land registry needs to come up with some proactive solutions to some of these problems. And then, of course, political patronage and networks, where political elites go around sharing land and putting aside certain land as public land, and then later on they come and turn the same land into private property, and this annoys the communities around there, and then they go to they fight now. Simply, this diagram goes to tell us that conflict is very complex. It's caused by so many problems. This is basically a land conflict, but you can see how many causes actually lead to such conflicts. And then we quickly look at the principles of conflict analysis. When you are analyzing a conflict, to be able to understand it deeply, so that then you can be able to solve it, what are some of the principles that can guide you to analyze that conflict thoroughly? And one of them is that a diversity of tools gives the greatest insight. So do not just use one tool. Try to use different tools. An example would be the conflict tree tool, which helps you understand the consequences of a conflict, the main cause of a conflict, and the root causes of a conflict. So that one especially helps you understand that you should not only focus on the consequences of a conflict, but also focus especially on the root causes, so you can prevent that conflict from happening again. So you can use that tool. But when you use another tool like the conflict map, it helps you now understand the different actors within a particular conflict. So then you can also focus on how many actors are there within a conflict, so you can get to understand them, so that now you're using a diversity of tools. When you come to a conflict like what happened in Kenya in 07-08, you would come up with the two political parties, Raila and Kibaki. You would look at the role that the media is playing, you would look at the role that the church is playing, you would look at the role that different community leaders, the international community is playing. So at that, you're analyzing the actors also, as opposed to just looking at the consequences and the root causes. So a diversity of tools gives the greatest insight. A diversity of analysis gives the greatest insight. So that when you're analyzing a conflict, do not just analyze with people coming from the same background. Try to get analysts coming from different backgrounds, so that then, depending on how they are socialized and brought up, they are able to analyze this conflict using a diverse range of perspectives. Huh? And that brings us to number 3, which is a little bit related to number 2. So that then perspectives and experiences shape analysis. So that from this diverse range of people, then you are likely to get people of different perspectives and experiences. And those people, depending on their cultural backgrounds, their ethnicity, their religion, their class, their education and family, sex, gender, and language, they are able to give you different perspectives of a conflict, so that then you can look at a conflict from different points of view. As opposed to just seeing it as ethnic, you'd try to see the religious components, you'd try to see the power components of it, so that you are looking at different components of a conflict. That analysis is dynamic, which means conflicts are dynamic. So when you start analyzing a conflict today, the kind of analysis you end up with today will not apply tomorrow, because conflicts keep changing. When you refer to the example of the conflict in Kenya in 07-08, one day we had elections and then we had the results, and the results were contested. People started talking silently in their neighborhoods, and by the third day, people were on the streets demonstrating, and then before you know it, different communities had started attacking each other. So you have to make sure that your analysis is dynamic. From day 1 to day 10 to 1 month, you have to be dynamic. When every new element adds, you have to capture, so that your analysis, you're not analyzing one day and then you start building peace based on the analysis that you captured on the first day. Analysis shapes action and policy, so that you have to be aware that when you do a thorough and an inclusive analysis, a comprehensive analysis, it will lead to better policy and therefore better action. Some of these policies could be used at NGO level, but sometimes governments take this analysis and they use it to come up with even national policy. So it's good that good attention is paid. It's like when you go to hospital and the doctor diagnoses you, when they get the diagnosis wrong, the kind of treatment they will give you is likely going to be wrong, and they are likely even to kill you. So we have to make sure that we get our analysis correct, because it shapes action and policy, and action and policy are long-term engagements that are very expensive. So we need to pay good attention to analysis. Analytical tools provide a focus on key drivers, because we know that peace building is expensive. So when you start analyzing a conflict, try to use as many analytical tools as possible, so you can narrow down at least 3 causes of a conflict, so that then peace building and policy of the government can focus on those 3 causes, as opposed to just mixing up and giving like 20 reasons. That way it makes sure that most of the money and the policy will be focused on too many things, and entirely you might not end up solving the conflict. Yeah. And then we quickly focus on the approaches to conflict analysis. What types of approaches can you use to analyze a conflict? And one of them is the contextualist approach, which helps you look at the environment within which the conflict is happening, so that then you can look at the politics that is taking place there, the cultural aspects. You want to understand how many tribes do we have here, which ones are friendly to each other, which ones are not friendly to each other. You want to look at the economic development within that country, so that you are looking at the external environment within which the conflict is happening, to understand how that is leading to the conflict. The rationalist approaches, they are more or less the intellectual approaches. So they help you understand the rationales that people are using to get involved into a conflict, and their understanding of whether they are going to win in that conflict, and if they are going to win, what are they planning to win, what consequences are they seeing. So you try to analyze the kind of rationales that are going into people deciding to go to war. And then the internalist approaches is when you look at people engaging into conflict because of their nature. So that then you are looking at the behavior of people. For instance, some scholars have observed that people who come from pastoralist communities are naturally aggressive. So they naturally like war. So when they are going to war, for them, they are doing nothing wrong because it's already in their nature. And people who are likely farmers who till the land and plant crops, they like engaging into dialogue. So when you're analyzing a conflict, you need to understand the internal qualities, the innate human qualities that lead to conflict. The instinct and the impulse to fight is different from one community to another. So you need to understand there are some countries in the world that have been fighting for the last 20 years. So some children were born during the war and they're in their 20s and they have never known anything else other than the war. So the war for them is normal. So these internal approaches could be as a result of nature, but also because of the nature, the environment you live in could also help even reinforce some of these natural instincts towards war. And quickly, now I focus on the worldviews upon which the conflict analysis tools are based before I talk about the conflict analysis tools themselves. So we have the Harvard approach. The Harvard approach guides you in such a way that when you're analyzing a conflict, you do not want just to focus on the positions of the people, because the positions, people will tell you this is what we want. But the Harvard School tells you that you need to focus on the interests. You need to understand the needs of the people. Why do those people want whatever they are saying they want, isn't it? The pastoralists will tell you they want land. The farmers will also tell you they want land. But the pastoralists want the land so that they can graze their animals. But the farmers want the land so that they can till it and plant crops. So those two interests are conflicting. So you need to understand that so that then you can be able to build peace between those two communities. And then the human needs theory actually explains that whenever there is a conflict, it means that there are certain basic human needs that have not been satisfied. So as you analyze a conflict, you try to establish those needs that have not been satisfied and try to build peace around those needs so they can be satisfied, especially if there are groups that have been marginalized. And then the conflict transformation approach is the whole idea that believes in the sense that conflicts are inevitable. They are always going to be there. So our aim is not to end a conflict, but to change the conflict from being violent to being non-violent, from being destructive to being productive, so that then it can help the people to be able to sit down and discuss their differences and be able to come to a compromise of what they need so as to be able to live together. So basically these are the worldviews, the three general worldviews upon which the conflict analysis tools are based. And we have already mentioned some of these analysis tools, but the conflict wheel, for instance, it's more or less like the malt spanner, because this is more or less giving you a sense that when you're analyzing conflicts, you need tools. So you more or less need like a toolbox. And within that toolbox, now we have got these tools. So the conflict wheel is like the meta tool, because it comprises all the other six tools. So it introduces the 6 important dimensions of conflict analysis: dynamics, actors, causation. So it focuses on different aspects of conflicts. But when you look at the conflict tree looks at the consequences of a conflict and then focuses on the main cause of a conflict and also on the root causes of a conflict. So it's organized to help you understand the consequences, the main cause and the root cause, so that it can enable you to focus on the root causes of a conflict. When you address those, then you prevent that conflict from happening again in future. Conflict mapping focuses on the stakeholders. You want to know the actors within a conflict and their relationships, so that you can try to build those broken relationships as a way of building peace. The Clausel's escalation model focuses on the whole idea that conflict is dynamic, so that when you're analyzing a conflict, you need to know at what level of escalation the conflict has reached for you to be able to intervene effectively. Yeah? And then there is the Inmedos. Inmedos is a German NGO, but they have come up with what we call the conflict perspective analysis, what they call a CPA. And we have mentioned this a little bit in the principles of conflict analysis, so that you have to understand the different perspectives of the people who are involved in a conflict. Yeah? If you were to come in Kenya in 07, 08, talk to Kibaki, hear what he's saying, listen to Raila, listen to their people, listen to the church, listen to the media, so that you can get different perspectives. And then from those perspectives, you can be able to come up with a narrative of what is causing that conflict. And then the needs and fears mapping, which is a little bit similar to the CPA, but this method focuses on actors and their issues, interests, needs and fears, means and options. It allows for a clear comparison of actors' similarities and differences in the form of a table. So you look at their fears and their needs. So you can put it on a table. So group A and group B, their fears and their needs. And then later on, you start looking at the similarities. So when you pick out the similarities, then you can use those similarities to be able to build peace between those two communities. The multi-causal model actually just helps you understand that conflict is not caused by one cause, but it's a multi-causal model, different reasons leading to conflict. Like when we looked at the land disputes, and then you saw that there are land disputes, but there are different causes that lead to land disputes. So this simply is a multi-causal model that helps you focus on different reasons as to why there's a conflict, as opposed to just getting stuck to the whole idea that, oh, conflicts in Kenya are caused by politics, yet there's more than that. And here is just an example of a conflict tree, and it's based on what happened in Rwanda. So basically, it just gives you an idea of how you can come up with a conflict tree. So you can see the root causes, and then you can see the main cause, and then you can see now the consequences. So, but it just tells you that in most cases, we want to look at the consequences and spend a lot of resources here and forget to focus here, and especially here, so that we need to focus on the root causes at the end of the day. And this more or less gives us an example of a conflict map tool, which highlights the actors, and this is based on the Rwandan case, so that you can see the state and the government, the RPF, and then the Tutsi population, the role of the Catholic clergy, the role of the media, and their relationship, so that then when you see these two lines, it means that the relationship is broken. When you see these ones, it means the relationship is strong. When you see this, it means the relationship is weak. So it helps you analyze the conflict that way. And then basically that brings us to the end of our lesson. Thank you so much.
These televised lectures supplement our robust online learning going on our MKU online platform. You can view more on our televised lectures via our online platform. We are in a digital era, and Mount Kenya University knows this. The following are the steps to follow so as to complete your online application. Download the application form from the website www.mku.ac.ke. Attach copies of your academic certificates and ID. Pay the application fees via M-Pesa pay bill number 270988. Your ID is the account number. 2,000 shillings is the charge for a postgraduate. You can also deposit in the bank accounts provided on the website. Then email all the above to apply@mku.ac.ke.